And the Democratic strategy is the same as it's always been. We aren't running on our record because they have no record to run on. We're running against Trump, who's the devil. That is it. Trump's the devil, so vote for us.
Bill O'Reilly was a guest on Piers Morgan Show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, and Bill O'Reilly broke down what he thinks is going to happen in the U.S. presidential election now that Joe Biden is out. Kamala Harris has now taken over. So he breaks down what he thinks is going to be the strategy of the Kamala Harris campaign, the strategy of Donald Trump's campaign, and how he thinks the two of them should go about running their campaigns. Let's take a look.
And you and I knew each other a bit when I was working at CNN, and it's good to talk to you. I can't actually think of many people better placed or more experienced in this world of presidency and presidents than you to try and put this in perspective. If you're a young person, you might think, well, this is all a bit crazy. If you're a bit older, like me or you, this is completely unprecedented, isn't it, what we're going through now?
Yeah. Woodrow Wilson is the closest thing to it. At the end of his second term, he had a stroke. Nobody knew about it, kept it from the press and the public. His wife, Edith Wilson, ran the government for about 18 months. I write about that in my upcoming book, Confronting the Presidents, which evaluates each of the 45 men, whether they hurt or helped America. It's going to be a big bestseller. But anyway, Wilson is the closest to Joe Biden resigning because of health reasons. LBJ, 1968, also has similarities because his policies in Vietnam particularly overwhelmed him. They were such bad policies. And he couldn't win. The party knew it. They wanted Robert Kennedy to run instead of LBJ, and LBJ acquiesced to that. So there is precedent in American history.
But I think I was talking sort of more collectively about the last few weeks in the sense of the debate, which was probably the most extraordinary debate we've ever seen, certainly on television in presidential history. Then the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, where he came within a quarter of an inch of being killed. And then Biden stepping aside and so late in the day. That collectively feels to me like a pretty extraordinary few weeks. How do you think this now plays out, Bill?
Well, it's been a lively 9 days here in the colonies. I'll tell you that. It goes back to the traditional campaign now. So it's Harris against Trump, Democrats against Republicans. Who's going to win? There's a debate scheduled September 10th. I think that'll come off, and Americans will decide. The candidates couldn't be further apart. There's absolutely no common ground between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, none. So like your government and voters over in Great Britain, it's a stark contrast. But it does go back into the traditional realm now of campaigning for 4 months, and then we all vote in November.
You know, I spoke to Donald Trump on Saturday night after he appeared at the comeback rally after the assassination attempt. And I did find it quite extraordinary that he not only found the strength in the moment of being shot to stand up and show that defiant raised fist and say, fight, 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 but that within a week, he was back on a stage in public, exposed for 2 hours in front of tens of thousands of people, none of whom he would have known. I mean, that does take a lot of personal strength to do that. How impactful will that be, do you think, on election voting? The fact that Trump has shown himself, when it really mattered, I guess, to be a proper leader.
He'll pick up a few votes, but not that many. I mean, his favorability rating this week in America is up to its highest level I think it's ever been. But that'll fade. It's a lot like the Teddy Roosevelt, 1912. Roosevelt got shot in the chest by some nut, but he had a speech and his eyeglass case inside his jacket, and it blunted the bullet. And Teddy, being Teddy, robust, went along with the speech and didn't stop, and then kept his campaign. Trump is a lot like Teddy Roosevelt. He's a guy who's out there. He's larger than life. He's got a lot of energy. He's not going to let the bastards get him down. He's fight. And that's his personality. He's very pugnacious, a lot like Winston Churchill, but not with Churchill's sense of decorum, when I spoke to Trump while he was making his decision to run this time around, I said, you ought to read Winston Churchill's comeback papers on how he did it after the British threw him out after World War II. He regained the prime ministership. You ought to read how he did it. Now, I'm sure Trump didn't do that. He's not a reader. He doesn't do that.
Trump's not a reader was an interesting comment here by Bill O'Reilly, I thought.
But both Churchill and Trump, and Teddy Roosevelt, big, larger-than-life, charismatic people, and that evokes both love and hate. So it's the bland men that, kind of are in the background that don't evoke passion, but the big men do.
In terms of his campaign, obviously, and he said this to me on Saturday, that he hoped Joe Biden would stay in the race as long as possible because clearly he could see that he was losing his faculties and his cognitive ability to even know what day it is. Now he's got someone in Kamala Harris who has to date been pretty unpopular, has not done particularly well as vice president, has a record that can be picked apart. But certainly, I watched her last night. She's telegenic. She's clearly not stupid. She's eloquent. She's articulate. She has a warmth about her. She has a certain charisma. And she now has the whole power of the Democrat machinery crashing behind her, including a ton of money, a ton of high-profile people, and so on. That will certainly help her. Can she possibly beat Trump, do you think?
Sure. Not only does she have the Democratic machine behind her, but she's got the media behind it, the American corporate media. So that's now an alliance. All right. So in America, we don't have a free press anymore because it's run by corporations, and the corporations make calculations based on profit and power. So it's not like it used to be when I was working for ABC News and CBS News as a correspondent all over the world, where we were told to gather information and present it no matter what it was. That's gone. Now it's point of view journalism. We're talking to the choir. We want the choir to watch us or read our paper, and that's where we make our money. So you better damn well do it, or you're not going to be working here.
Bill O'Reilly is exactly correct with what he's saying here, that we don't have a free press anymore, that it's all run by large corporations who have biases and they try to tell the viewers and the listeners what to think. He's absolutely right about that. But what's funny to me about this is Bill O'Reilly worked for Fox News for more than 20 years. He was part of this massive corporate machine. I always think it's funny when the Fox people act as if they're just these ragtag group of upstarts instead of working for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So Bill O'Reilly was part of all of that until he lost his job because of multiple misconduct lawsuits. He's independent now, not by choice. He was fired in 2017 from one of these giant corporations that he's talking about who control the media.
So free press, forget it. That doesn't exist. So when you have 85% of the American media lined up behind Kamala Harris and all the big money Hollywood people and Wall Street people, BlackRock, things like that, she has got plenty of resources. But you make a mistake if you think she's articulate. She is not. She can read the teleprompter. She can't think extemporaneously. She can't. And you're going to see her being protected from people like me and you. We're not going to get to interview Kamala Harris. She'll never sit for interviews like that, ever. It's going to be the same strategy that Biden employed for 3.5 years. You stay away from the press. You don't hold press conferences. You select cupcake interviewers to come in and even have to give the questions in advance to Kamala Harris. That will happen. You're not going to see her on the firing line. And the Democratic strategy is the same as it's always been. We aren't running on our record because they have no record to run on. We're running against Trump, who's the devil. That is it. Trump's the devil, so vote for us. You can't defend open borders. You can't defend all of the price rises on everything imaginable in the United States. You can't defend it. It's indefensible. You can lie about it, and certainly both parties do, because the press is so lazy and stupid that it won't call those lies out like it used to, but it won't any longer. So we have a big mess here. And it's going to come down to whether there are enough of us in the media to tell people, here it is. You vote for Kamala Harris, you're voting for the most liberal president in history by far. You vote for Donald Trump, you're voting for a guy who's volatile. And I don't believe he's a threat to democracy. I don't believe any of that. I wrote a book, The United States of Trump. I chronicle his style. But he's got 4 years. And most Americans prospered during those 4 years. They did. The economic stats prove it. But Trump himself is a rather undisciplined character. And when I talk to him, which is, I've known him 35 years, I keep telling him, Mr. President, step back. You want to win? That's your best revenge. Discipline yourself. Last night he called Kamala Harris dumb as a rock. Why? Is that going to get Donald Trump one vote? The people who despise Kamala Harris already believe she's dumb as a rock. Do you have to tell them for the 80th time? No. Advance your cause by pointing out what you did and what you will do in specific terms.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, actually, on this very point, I think if he goes too ad hominem with Kamala Harris, he's going to play into her hands, and she will use that as a, look at what he's like, he's a monster, blah, blah, blah. If he just picks her off on, sorry?
Yeah, remember, she's going to do that.
Go ahead.
Okay, Kamala Harris, her whole campaign is ad hominem, the Latin, to the man. Okay? That's her whole campaign. He's a felon, he's a rapist, he's a racist, he's this, he's that. And Trump does not react well to that, obviously. I don't think you would. But at this point in history, the best strategy is let her do that. All right, if she wants to be a gutter snipe, let her. Because Americans aren't stupid. The
trouble is, Bill, if you think about Donald Trump, and I've known him a long time too, 20 years, not as long as you, but his ability to rise above that kind of thing is very limited.
But he's smart enough to do it. So all that means is he has to want to do it.
There's also, people talk a lot about the division in America being never as bad as it is today. Do you agree with that, Bill? I think back to the 60s and how unbelievably toxic that decade was, and with a number of assassinations of presidents and then his brother and then Martin Luther King and so on. And that was a pretty extraordinary decade. Do you feel that America is more or less divided today than it was then?
Excellent question, because you framed it properly. A lot of people ask the divided question, but they don't frame it the way you did, which is excellent. Civil War run-up was the most divisive time in American history. The Revolutionary War run-up was the second. 50% of the colonists supported the king here. Okay? Only 50% wanted to break away. Both of those override what's happening now. The 60s was based on one issue. Vietnam was an issue division. Now it's a cultural division. You have traditional Americans like me that understand the country is noble and strong because we rely on a justice system that's fair, on patriotism, and on hard work. You have a progressive movement that wants to put skin color and gender above achievement. That division is never going to be healed. There's never going to be common ground there, ever. And people are furious. Families break up over it. So the cultural divide here at this point in history is enormous. And the only thing that might heal that is a charismatic leader who would emerge and talk common sense to the folks, to level with the folks. Look, we're all Americans, and this is what you have to do to prosper. And stop with the DEI stuff and the liberals are the devil stuff. Stop. All right? Let's get solutions to our problems. And we are in short supply with that right now.
Piers Morgan and Bill O'Reilly are both correct with what they say here, I think. Piers Morgan, in saying that it's the most divided the country has been since the Vietnam War, is correct. But also Bill O'Reilly saying, obviously, what's happening now is not as bad as the Civil War era and the Revolutionary War era in terms of division in the country. Like Bill O'Reilly says, you had, leading up to the Revolutionary War, you had half of the country who supported the king. So you can't get a whole lot more divided than that. Bill O'Reilly talking about the 60s, he says that the country was only divided over one issue, and that's the Vietnam War. I would disagree. What he's talking about with the cultural divide that we have today, they had the same thing in the 1960s. It wasn't just the Vietnam War. It was basically the hippie movement against the traditional people who would have been the Bill O'Reilly type people at that time. And it wasn't just about the Vietnam War. It was free love and these other things. And, you know, they were rebelling against traditional standards, ways of life in the United States, patriotism. A lot of the battles were against the traditional 40s and 50s kind of lifestyle of being very patriotic. And then these people, the hippies, rebelling against that patriotism. So I think Bill O'Reilly he's half correct with what he's saying, but half incorrect. And as Piers Morgan points out, it is probably the most division in the country since the Vietnam era, but certainly does not compare to the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. But what do you think about all of this? What do you think about the points that Bill O'Reilly made on Piers Morgan's show? Is he correct in his assessment of the upcoming election, how things are going to go between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump running for president? Is he correct about his assessment of the media, that there isn't really a free press anymore, that it's all corporate owned? I would agree with Bill O'Reilly on that, even though he was a major part of that corporate owned media for 20 years. But what do you think? Is Bill O'Reilly correct with everything that he's said here on Piers Morgan? Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. That helps the channel to grow and for me to create more content like this. Also, leave me a comment about Piers Morgan Uncensored, Bill O'Reilly, whatever you want to comment on. I'll see you in the next video.